Yes, history of Cossacks is very interesting, and I was surprised that there is practically no research in English language on contemporary Cossacks. There are some books published on history of Cossacks, but even then, few people realize in the West that there is a distinction between Ukrainian Cossack tradition and Russian Cossack tradition, in the sense that Ukrainian Cossacks evolved 14th, 15th, 17th century as part of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and they were based in the wild west of eastern Ukraine, so to speak, in the no man's land between the Turkic-speaking nomads invading from the south, from Crimean Khanate, and from the east from other Turkic-speaking nomadic populations. And the sort of established Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth population north of the river Dnipro. So Ukrainian Cossacks evolved as a kind of warrior caste of effectively only men living on uninhabited islands, or they inhabited those islands to build their little fortresses there called siege. And as Karl Marx said, Cossacks in Ukraine created this first Christian republic because they would elect their chieftains, Ottoman, and they would be effectively like a religious military order living on the border between nomads in the south and several population in the north. The only membership criteria for Ukrainian Cossacks were that A, someone had to be a Christian, and B, someone had to acknowledge the jurisdiction of the elected Ottoman. So that was the history of Ukrainian Cossacks, again, as a military order of men living in a sort of brotherhood of arms, let's say, a warrior caste. While Russian Cossacks had a similar social origin, but they settled in different parts of Russia, initially on the river Don, where Rostov-on-Don is now. But then they moved around Russia during the 17th century, and they settled as far as Ural River, and they also conquered Siberia and moved to the far east. So Russian hosts, they evolved along a different sort of path in terms of being settled population. So Russian Cossacks were married farmers who were working the land, but they also paid their taxes to the Tsars by serving a certain amount of years in the Russian army as light cavalry, right? So that was a difference between Ukrainian Cossacks who didn't recognize any powers initially, and they were a sort of military order living independently. They were not settled in the sense that they lived on these fortified islands on the river Dnieper. And then later on, they were incorporated into military service with Polish kings or Russian Tsars. But essentially, they had this different lifestyle from the Russian Cossacks who lived as a kind of militarized farming population. And that lasted in Ukraine until 18th century, when Catherine the Great disbanded the last Ukrainian Cossack siege. And Ukrainian Cossacks moved to the Danube River, but also were incorporated into Russian Cossacks moving to the Kuban River. So Kuban Cossacks were speaking Ukrainian up until 1930s. They still sing Ukrainian songs, but they lost the sense of Ukrainian identity in Kuban, mostly lost Ukrainian identity. While Russian Cossacks, they were preserved as settled farmers effectively until the Bolshevik Revolution, 1917. They fought against the Bolsheviks during the Russian Civil War. Many of them were either killed by the Bolsheviks or emigrated, and then at some point even some Cossack hosts joined the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union. Right, so the last Cossacks, Russian Cossacks, fought against the Bolsheviks during the Second World War. So Russian Cossacks effectively ceased to exist as cavalry units during Second World War, while the last Ukrainian hosts existed at the end of 18th century, beginning of 19th century. And that also explains the difference in the Cossack revival, because Russian Cossacks still had these imperial memories, family memories, and they sort of evolved in Russia alongside of this neo-imperial ideology. While the Ukrainian Cossacks had to be reinvented effectively in Ukraine, because there was no living tradition that was preserved, and therefore Ukrainian Cossacks in contemporary Ukraine are a little bit like a folk and dance societies. So you can compare, for instance, with the population of Scandinavian countries remember themselves as descendants of Vikings. So population of Ukraine remember itself as descendants of Ukrainian Cossacks. Even Ukrainian anthem is saying that Ukrainians are of Cossack origin. But that is a historical fact, and it's a type of historical memory and identity rather than a contemporary Cossack movement as it is in Russia. Another big difference in contemporary Russia and Ukraine is that Russian Federation legislation recognized Russian Cossacks as separate ethnic community, while Ukrainian Cossacks are recognized in Ukraine as NGOs, non-government organizations.